Welcome everyone to today's Pursuant webinar. This is the second webinar in our series on omnichannel fundraising. We know that's been kind of a big buzzword in the fundraising space and in the marketing space. But today we wanted to narrow in on placing your constituents at the center of that journey and really exploring what it looks like to have a donor-centric and a constituent-centric view to really create that optimal experience. We have a couple of really great presenters with us today that I am thrilled to introduce you to, but I have just a few housekeeping items that I will go into first. So today's webinar is being recorded. So if you have to drop early, you'll be able to come back and finish where you left off. And if you would like, you can also share that with a colleague. We will also be sharing the slides. So if you are furiously scribbling down notes, you'll be able to go back and reference where you were. You are also invited to raise questions using the Q&A panel in your Zoom toolbar. You can interact with us throughout the entirety of today's presentation. We really want today to be interactive for you to be able to ask questions of our guests. So we invite you to locate that now. And if you are curious about what is Pursuant, who are we, what do we do? We are a fundraising and marketing agency that is really strongly driven by analytics, insights, and technology. And you can see that right there with our GivingDNA platform. And so we invite you to also visit our website if you would like to learn more about what we do and how we serve the nonprofit space. All right, my name is Leah Fadling, newly married, so that's still a little bit interesting for me to introduce myself that way. And I serve as our senior marketing manager here at Pursuant. I will be moderating the questions, so that will be the person typing responses to you and raising your questions with our guests. And without any further ado, I am thrilled to turn things over to Matthew to introduce himself and our guest, Angel Aloma.
Cool. Thank you so much, Leah. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So glad that you are here. A little background. At Pursuant, we believe that constituents are complex and multifaceted. When we talk about a donor, an advocate, services recipient, people aren't just one type of constituent, but they might cycle through their relationship with your organization in multiple ways and in different ways over time. And so we believe that your brand should reflect this relationship in a consistent manner, regardless of the channel. And so that's why we believe that omni-channel discussions are so important. And so as Leah mentioned, this is the second in our series of 3. And we have invited an authority on the topic of both storytelling as well as donor care to discuss both of those topics with us today. So welcome, Angel Aloma. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I love, now that, I am somewhat semi-retired, I love sharing, whatever I have learned over the years, because I love this sector. This sector is a wonderful place to be in. It allowed me to drive for 21 years to work with a smile on my face and to come home after a long day with a smile on my face. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
We should all wish so much. So I love that and appreciate the opportunity for you to share. I wanted to start with a little bit of your background. You've had a long career as an educator. You've also worked for decades, really, with Food for the Poor, one of the largest international charities in the country. You served both as executive director there as well as the chief marketing officer. And wondering if you could just set the stage for us a little bit about your career in philanthropy and fundraising.
Well, I was a teacher for 28 years, as you mentioned. And I got this offer when the founder retired. It left a big hole there because he was the one that had they didn't have a major gift department. Yep. And it left a big hole because he was the one that had all those relationships. Now, I had no experience in fundraising, but I had a lot of experience in relationships. Yeah. And so they invited me to come as executive vice president. Being an academic, I not only love to teach, I also love to learn. So I started researching everything in the fundraising world and seeing what we were doing right and what we were doing wrong. And then I started having monthly meetings with my directors to pass on that information to them, because I knew that not everyone loves to research. I did. And when I finished with the nonprofit stuff that I could get my hands off, I started trying to steal things from the commercial sector, which is amazing how many things we can steal from them. So then we went from founder-centered in our copy to organizational-centered, and with mission, but it was the organization doing everything that was done. And then I had the great fortune that I went to the IFC conference in Holland and listened to a presentation by Thomas Hearn, who is considered to be the guru of donor centricity. And he read from many different large charities. And I was sitting there very smugly saying, we don't do that. We're very donor centric. At every meeting, we say donor is king. Yeah. And when I got back home and I started reading what we did, I said, oh my God, we are far from donor centric. Yeah. So I started, the creative department was one of my 16 departments that were under my watch. And so I started being the last editor, and I started sending back everything that was giving the organization the credit rather than the donors the credit. And we had always had trouble with our newsletters because it was basically what Food for the Poor had done for the year. And so I decided, after Tom Ahern's inspiration, to get together with the direct mail department, and they created a newsletter that the heading of it was Why You Matter. And it had pictures of the mission all over in the side the letters, and every story was not about what Food for the Poor had achieved, but rather what the donor had achieved. Well, normally we would make about 300,000 to 500,000 net on the newsletters, whereas our appeals would make over $1 million net. Wow. This newsletter made 1.3 million net. And Tom Ahern actually used it in his book that he had as an example of true donor centricity. So I was very proud of that also. But it shows that it's not just a matter that you do it, just to be nice. You do it because it pays back to be donor centric.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I've heard you talk about this before, being donor centric, focusing on donor motivation, but even more fundamentally, talking about passion. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about tapping into passion and why understanding passion is important, because I would say the day in, day out of direct mail production, I don't know that we think about passion all that much. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what role it plays.
Sure. Well, passion is tremendously important to storytelling, just to begin with. We forget that storytelling is part of our DNA, that many years before the printing press, the history of countries and villages came from the oral tradition, where you told stories about it, and we learned from storytelling. So you need passion for that. But passion is also a very important part of what I call a virtuous circle, because passion actually promotes energy. Energy gives you time to do more work. It gives you the passion, the energy to work on your mission. When your mission is successful, you love your mission more. And by loving that mission more, it creates more passionate feelings. So it's kind of a virtuous circle that is very important to do better. And of course, if you can speak to your donors with passion, it's much nicer than if you bore them, with drollness.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could go into that, a little bit more in terms of connecting that passion to driving engagement and connecting with individuals and supporters.
Well, once we had this revelation from Tom Ahern, and I started digging into it, I found out there is this thing called an emotional inquiry study. When we ask our donors, why do you give to Food for the Poor? They almost like, duh, to help the poor. With this study, they did 2-hour interviews that really took them into the best of their truths. Rather than saying what we might want to hear, they really went into their history. And they did it by asking questions that, and it's an advice I give to all for major donors, asking questions that elicit storytelling rather than asking questions that elicit short answers. Rather than what car do you drive, say a Subaru, tell me, why did you choose a Subaru? It's important to ask questions that elicit stories because we get so much more than what we ask from those stories. It's amazing what donors will reveal from it. So they did that type of interviews with them, and they found out something that was tremendously earth-shakingly new for us. We always believed the donor when they told us that the reason why they gave was to help the poor. They found out that the main reason why they give is to feel good about themselves. And what a revelation that was for our copy. So again, after getting very donor-centric with the copy, then we started now adding to that the praise of the donor, not flattery, because it has to be true. Right. When a donor, particularly the major donors, when they give you $500,000 to build a village of homes, it's not flattery to say they're generous, that they're compassionate, that they're loving, that they're caring. So we started making the donor feel good. We eliminated the word help from our copy. It used to be, thank you for helping Food for the Poor to do this. Thank you for helping Food for the Poor to do that. It became, thank you for building homes. Thank you for supplying clean water to the villages. Thank you for giving those children an education. So it became very direct part of the donor, which of course made the donor feel good. When they feel good, again, it's a little bit of a circle, they give more. We found this, for example, with our thank yous. Our thank yous was sometimes 5 to 10% of our income, and we were the second largest international charity. Our income was pretty good, but the fact was that we sent it immediately, and we had the technology to do this, and technology and data are so important. I'm very here, but
no, I wanted to share, so I lead the research team here at Pursuant, and we have a methodology for exploring motivation and passion. We call it strategic segmentation, and it's much more quantitative. So we often talk with between 300 and maybe 1,000 current donors, and certainly we ask them why they support the organization. And one framework that has been really interesting is, let's say it's an international relief and development organization, or maybe even let's use a health foundation as an example. And what we find is we often have the ability to look at a donor file and identify unique clusters or segments of donors that behave the way that they do in a similar manner. And so this framework that we have found, and it's really in line with what you talked about and some of the themes that you'll talk about later, but it is, I give to benefit me. So that's something like, I'm giving to a hospital because if I'm in an accident and I need an emergency airlift, I know that within the community, me or my family will be better served, or, even to cure a disease that I might know I have a genetic marker on. So I give to benefit me, I give to benefit we. So that example would be, I want to be taken to the hospital really quickly, but I also believe my neighbors and my community and the underprivileged. And then the opposite is I give to benefit you. And I would almost say on the altruistic, cycle, the you is perhaps, the most altruistic, not that any of them are wrong or right, but we often see donors kind of gravitating towards those. And it's a different framework for different types of organizations, but it can also lead us to understand a little bit more of who's mission driven. So I'm giving to benefit you is probably more mission driven, probably going to have a higher, typically average gift, greater retention, because that altruism is so strong versus just giving to benefit me, which is I'm giving to an arts organization because I wanted to go see, the latest Broadway show at the nonprofit, theater or something along those lines. Have you encountered similar themes in your work?
Very much so. And you know, to me, there is no true altruism because giving it activates exactly the same reward center than drinking alcohol or drugs or sex or any of those things. And that's why it's so important when a donor gives to recognize it immediately, because if they're still smoking that cigarette after giving, you know, then if you catch them in that afterglow, they're very likely, or many of them are very likely to give again. But no, what you said is absolutely proven by science, actually.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. So so that's great. You started to touch on data and technology and why those are so important. I'm wondering, you know, so a nonprofit organization becomes interested in understanding motivation. Let's assume that you know, they complete a study or are talking with their donors. How do you operationalize the capture of what they're interested in, the content, you know, generation, as well as the dissemination of a lot of those messages?
Well, I think basically we have to have programs that appeal to all the different segments.
Okay.
We can't wait for millennials to grow up, for example, for them to give. We have to have something that appeals to them. The thermometer, you know, the actual, you know, this hospital needs an ambulance. You have everybody going online, you have a thermometer, you keep going up, and they all celebrate when that is met. You have to have stuff for the silent generation who gives by faith. They trust us and they just give. Because we say, okay, this is going towards food. They trust the fact that it's going towards food. The baby boomers, they want to see and be more hands-on on what, you know, they're giving for, and they're giving a lot. They just want to be involved. And of course, the generations coming afterwards, you know, many of them are getting ready to start giving for different reasons, but they want to save the world with their own hands also. They want to be very on the job too.
Oh, I have a quick thought. Just a quick thought there around that program design. I agree with you 1,000%. And I think it's very bold to be able to strategically identify that audience you might want to pursue and then craft programs around them. And I would say that at Pursuant, we have done almost what I would call product design and development work that quite simply acknowledges that our traditional donor base is not going to drive growth in the future. And so, you know, our mandate for these organizations is not only identifying or diversifying our donor base, but really creating programs, mission programs, not even fundraising programs, but mission programs that are worthy of support and that would recruit and attract a more diverse constituency. And so some examples have been in the faith-based space, where the traditional donor base might be very old, conservative, and quite simply the organization over the years has failed to attract and acquire younger donors. Certainly it relates to ethnicity as well. And so, you know, as organizations seek to grow and build strategies, if your donor base is overwhelmingly white, perhaps we need to revisit what our program portfolio looks like and create programs that are of interest for that diverse audience. So age, you know, expanding from a traditional donor base, creating tomorrow's donor, and then also just quite simply a more diverse donor base in all regards, I think is super important. So I love that concept of product design, product development, and really creating something that will tap into the passion and motivations of supporters.
And you will always have superstars amongst them.
Okay.
We had an 11-year-old at Food for the Poor who actually built villages in Haiti. We had a 16-year-old who's a golf phenom, and he actually did these fundraising golf events and he built many schools in Jamaica. So, and this is great because the press loves them. So you get a lot of, when you have an 11-year-old and a 16-year-old, the press comes, over. You don't have to, your PR people can relax a little because they naturally come to them. But, it's great to get to know your donors for whatever they are, but also donors tend to reveal a lot when they tell stories. So again, I think the questions of storytelling, for storytelling are great, but also that you have things that, besides the emotional inquiry study, just any conversation with a donor, you should have a technology system that actually captures all the information for anyone in the organization to be able to do it, because a donor in their growth, in their journey, will pass through many different departments and many different things. And you have to remember, you must allow them to give to what they want to, the way through whatever channel they want to. So at everyone in the organization should be able, any conversation with them should be not recorded word for word, but the essence of the conversation should be technology that allows them to have it. Where data is concerned, every organization, I recommend that you ban gut feelings, because you will get people who know absolutely nothing about fundraising coming, well, I have a gut feeling that we're sending too many letters. Oh, I have a gut feeling. These are usually other executives who know nothing of fundraising. And so ban gut feelings and go with data. Data is sacred. It's what tells you where to go and how to go about it.
Yeah, I know you're a pioneer in this area, specifically related to data capture and data technology. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, even name explicitly some of the tools that you or teams have used for data recording and even disseminating and sharing data within an organization.
Well, we had an older system, which was the AS400. It did not have all the bells and whistles, but it had a tremendous capacity for storing and sharing a tremendous amount of data.
Yeah.
We actually left that system in my last year at Food for the Poor, and it was chaos that ensued. So you have to be careful about changes where data is concerned.
Yeah.
But basically, it's the ability to record, the ability to send out a thank you with technology the day of or the day after the gift is received.
Yeah.
And I know that we were a large organization, but it's not that expensive, because many smaller organizations suffer from this thing of the president wanted to write a handwritten note on the thank you, and then it goes out a month later. The cigarette is done by that time. The afterglow is finished by that time. So give them the thank you within a week of the, that afterglow lasts between 4 to 7 days. Make sure your thank you goes out. They have proven in much research that it's not so much what you write as the speed with which you get it to them. As long as you write something that makes the donor feel good about himself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I think it's amazing. Some of the tools that we encounter with our agency clients at Pursuant are just typically not just donor databases, but full CRM products. So constituent relationship management products. I think we see HubSpot mentioned very often with the clients that we work with who are interested in a centralized CRM. Many use Blackbaud solutions, Salesforce solutions as well. And so much of what the promise of those tools are is the ability to quite simply track an interaction. So I talked with so-and-so, and anyone who follows the account or the organization within your organization then has the ability and insight to see and to recognize that individual in a next discussion, which I think is so important, and really the value of that.
I think to add to that is that you have to be aware of all the new things. We live in a sector that has many outside challenges that are beyond our control. But for every outside challenge, something comes in that makes it better also. For example, if you're not experimenting with machine learning, you should be. If you're not using co-ops, you should. These are things that exist in our sector that actually make things easier for us. The co-ops have many tremendous advantages, that just regular lists do not. They're modeled on. They come from a donor base where they can actually add others and stuff to it. Machine learning, we experimented with it. Co-targeting, using Facebook as co-targeting. We never used it that it didn't at least break even with what was gotten at Facebook. And we don't know. It's very hard to do attribution sometimes with fundraising. We don't know how much it may have increased the other part that we can't, that we can't know what it was, like we do with what goes through Facebook itself. So experiment and don't be afraid of failure. Failure is better than success where learning is concerned. And I always used to tell we have an internal phone center at Food for the Poor. I always used to tell them, celebrate every no that you get, because it's a numbers game. It was every 30 no's, we got a yes. You're one near it to the yes. You're one closest. So celebrate failure, because it really is a much better teacher than success.
Yeah, I love that so much. At Pursuant, we have a platform called GivingDNA that makes use of and applies machine learning. I think so many fundraisers are being hit with messages related to the concept, and it feels daunting, or it feels scary, or it feels like a black box. But I think people really understand the value and benefit of it, or understand it when they can understand the value and benefit of it. So, quite simply, things like having trained models that help an organization understand pre-lapsers at the mid-level, for instance. So, help me to flag who I need to call or put at the top of my list, or identifying sustainer candidates. Really, in many cases, machine learning to us is quite simply modeling that learns and allows us to more effectively target and engage. Are there any other aspects of machine learning that you'd advise folks to pursue? I think it's not a topic that's going to go away, and we're also a little afraid of it.
Well, they're getting better and better at it. And that's the thing. From we started with it till when I left, they had improved many things. The hardest thing for them to control was the cost of their names. So the cost was higher, but they were dead on usually on which when you divide in 10 parts, and you have the top ones and which ones we should mail and which ones we should not. And we mailed against them just to make sure they were right about it, because we have had issues before where it wasn't that way. And sure enough, they were dead right on who to mail and dead right on who not to mail, and then you can decide what risk you want to take in the middle. They had improved that tremendously before I left. And, the cost of names, I think eventually that will come to also. I'd like to speak for 1 minute about consultants in general. Many organizations have a fear of consultants, and they have to realize that consultants can be part of your mission. When you treat them with acceptance, when you treat them with love, when you treat them with friendship, they will become part of your mission and actually help you, because they have so much of the knowledge that we lack in our organizations. And I'm not saying that because now I'm a consultant, it's not here or there for me, but I hate when that thing of, well, they're a for-profit. So what? Non-profits are also for-profits. We also have the corporate side. We just happen to give the profit we make to a mission, but that doesn't mean that we don't make a living from it, that we don't make salaries. And so I'd like to say that, consultants really, and just anyone that you treat with acceptance, they will become friends of your mission also, and work with a lot more enthusiasm rather than feeling like outsiders that so many people make them feel.
Yeah, I love that approach as an often consultant myself, and certainly I feel that way as I get to understand so many organizations' missions that we serve. I'd like to talk a little bit about operationalizing that motivation and operationalizing that passion. I talked a little bit about degrees of connection and degrees of mission support and finding those donors that are mission driven. I think that this is a really interesting comparable framework. And so I was wondering if you could tell us about this, and then also tell us how you used it.
Well, when we did the emotional inquiry study, they also created for the donors that they did it with a pyramid of good. And at the very top of that pyramid was our missionaries, those who gave self-sacrifice. Now, what we did with that was really I think really smart. We tried to make the donor feel like a missionary in absentia. Like rocking chair missionaries. I noticed that a lot of times I called anyone personally who had given a gift of $3,000 or more to the organization. And a lot of time when I thanked them, they said, no, I thank you because if it wasn't for your organization, we would not be able to achieve the work that we do. So I said, well, that's because you're rocking chair missionaries. When a woman goes to bed at night in Haiti, thanking God that her children will live to see the dawn because of your work, then you are there in spirit. You're a missionary in spirit. And man, that really increased. It touched something in our major donors that really made them respond, Because if this is their highest level of good, their second is actually them. It's actually those who fund international, the self-sacrifice of the missionaries. But if you make them feel that they're right at the edge of that top part, it increases their giving, because again, they give because they want to feel good. If you can make them feel they're there, that's great. So basically, again, our copy, reflected that, reflected all the things. There was something very important here, the obligatory donation. I remember quotes, they gave us all the quotes of people they interviewed. And they said, when I give to my church, I feel like if I'm giving to the IRS. When I give to food for the poor, I feel like if I'm giving to God. And shame on the churches that make their people feel that way, that they're an ATM. Just give me money now because we need the roof repaired. Give me money now because we need the windows replaced. They obligatory giving like that doesn't give them that afterglow. It's very important never to guilt them into giving, but rather to make them feel good into giving.
That is at the bottom of this pyramid. Obviously, that is perhaps among the most transactional of gifts. And often, giving through churches or schools or other organizations, a nonprofit may not even receive the donor information. So as much as we might try, we might not even have the ability to kick off and have a relationship with those organizations because the funds may be delivered in bulk. So it's a no-win situation, although the revenue is certainly appreciated. So for each of these sort of levels or tiers, did you prescribe distinct pathways, or was there distinct content? Can you talk a little bit about, or unique segmentation based on the type of gift that was made?
Food for the Poor had a tremendous amount of different work. We built homes, we did water wells, we sent food. We had over $1 billion of in-kind that we sent, food and clothing and construction material and, a lot of the things like that. We also did medical. Now, the medical was the one that was the least successful in fundraising. Because I guess basically we didn't have groups that would give particularly to medical stuff. It's easier when you have a disease and you're collecting for that disease. But we had medical in general, very type of simple medical, like building a clinic here, building a clinic there. So it was more difficult for that. But for the other stuff, like we had the people who loved building homes, we had the people who loved water as their thing, clean water. We had the people who liked food, the feeding, because the feeding was actually, and they could relate to this very much. And of course, the name Food for the Poor gives you a little hint as to what our main thing is. But food also would save lives. And that was very important. We found out that about our donors in this inquiry also. They didn't want to deal with the student who had food, who had clean water, and who needed a new pair of sneakers or a iPad. They wanted to save lives, to deal with what Jesus called in the scriptures, the least of these, of my brothers and sisters, you know. So that was a very important thing, and we could segment all of those and of course treat them differently according to that.
Yep. Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. So going, a little deeper, I think that it feels like certainly an epiphany of your work. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the tactics, things that you did specifically, as well as things that organizations who are on this call should consider. So it's almost like, give us the moment that you had at that conference where you felt like Food for the Poor was doing a good job, and then take us, beyond that a little bit with some tactics and ways that you really break through.
Well, to be donor-centric, you have to know your donor. And that, as I always call it, is the 11th commandment, know thy donor. I always said it was written on the back of the tablets, and it was recently discovered because an American tourist was there and he took a selfie and he got the back of the tablet that said, know thy donor. That is such an important thing for every level of your donors, because people feel that this is something, well, for major donors, you visit them, you get to know them and so forth and so on. And that is true. They give a lot of the money, a lot of the income comes from a very small percentage of the people. But we have found that when it's not only knowing your donor, you have to let them know that you know them. So, for example, we at Food for the Poor, we mail 27 pieces a year, basically twice a month, and an extra one here or there, Christmas or Easter. The second one, the least successful one, we decided to try something different. And so we got from technology the date that the people first started giving to the charity. Not we found out the year, but we didn't mention the year. But we would write to that segment of donors who started donating in February and said, this month, 12 years ago, you did something amazing. You gave your first gift to Food for the Poor. And we continue with that line to praise the donor for that. We found that then we took them off, of course, that second piece that we sent that was the weaker of the two. That always beat that second piece in income. Why? Yeah. Because the donor is thinking, oh my God, I didn't even remember when I started, but these people know. They know me. They're not thinking, okay, they're doing it with technology. They're feeling good about the fact that we could tell them something that they themselves had forgotten. With major donors, it's very important. When I did the coffee break every month we did coffee break with the executive director, and there's no coffee and there's no break, but there was an executive director there, that is me. And I asked the major donors associates to invite up to 12 to 15 people. I don't want any larger than that or much smaller than 10 either. So they did, and I would tell them things that the rest of donors were not aware of. So they felt like part of the inner circle, like part, I asked for their advice. I told them stories of the field that had not been published. And I asked them to speak, to tell us how they felt about Food for the Poor. And I would say stuff to them like, it's a Christian organization. And this man said he loved feeding the poor as Jesus did. And I said, you are truly walking in his footsteps. And he started crying and said, that's why I love Food for the Poor so much. That brought up the emotion of everyone. Everyone was choked up when the gentleman started crying and said that. And that's the sort of thing you want to do. You want to make them, when they tell their story, Food for the Poor should be part of it. Just like for our story, the donor should be an extremely strong part of it.
Yeah, I love that. We often, when we're talking about donor centricity at Pursuant and with our clients, have kind of a quick test for that. And it's quite simply that donors want to be heard. So if they are speaking back, is someone there, to listen? They want to be recognized. And so specifically, we mean acknowledged for who they are, what they care about, how long they have been a supporter, and then also valued. So we want to thank them for, their level of engagement or giving as well. So being heard, recognized, and valued. And I think that really shines through in all of the examples that you mentioned. I love the idea, again, just from a tactical perspective of acknowledging that special gift date, in particular for honor and memorial giving, for health-related charities or others more broadly can have even greater significance. So I think that's a very strong way to do it. Wondering if you could talk a little bit about sustainer cultivation as well, and so some tactics you may have used here.
Well, when I went to Food for the Poor, the sustainer program had been on autopilot for about 10 years, and we still had a large amount of them who stayed with us. We decided then at that time with our director of web to create a website that was almost completely geared to monthly donations. Wow. And so this increased our monthly donations tremendously, and nice donations too. The major donors were also asked. There is a gentleman I remember in particular who was the nicest person. I visited him twice. This really sweet guy had a big Washington position, retired. He said to me, my house is paid for, my wife passed away. I take out what I need to survive. The rest I give to Food for the Poor. $3,750 a month he gave to Food for the Poor. So it's not something that we should only think for little donors to give $7 a month, but it's also very important then to get into multi-channel work where that is concerned. It took me 3 years to convince the board to allow us to do TV. But you know what? You should never give up. Eventually they'll say yes.
Yeah,
of course, it might be their idea when it's successful, but who cares? I have a plaque here on my desk that says, it's amazing what we can achieve when no one cares who gets the credit. And that's exactly true. Television, then Spanish television, radio, and they're all monthly things. But again, the personal issue, these are not donors, but the strategic partners. Our phone center for English was in Oregon. Our phone center for Spanish was in Mexico. Every year, the director for the radio and myself went to visit them. I would try to make them feel that they were part of Food for the Poor and tell them that they were saving the lives. I told them very graphically, I said, whenever you increase, our ask was $19 a month. I said, if you can increase that to 25, I can't tell you that you have 60 more meals going to save starving children. So you're not just employees of a phone center, you are lifesavers. And I want you to understand this. Whenever you get a credit card instead of a giving by check, you will get us another month and a half to 2.5 months of income, because it's not that they don't want to give it, is that they forget. It's mostly an elderly crowd, and they just forget. So when you get them on credit card, that 2.5 months of whatever they have given, that goes to save the lives of children. It's amazing what happened, Matthew. The middle gift, the average gift for the TV became $25 instead of $19, and the credit cards went up from 50% to 68%. Again, because you have that human interest to acknowledge these people. And guess what? They also want to feel good, just like our donors. They want to feel good about themselves. And we did that. Every year I visited Mexico and I visited Oregon, and it was amazing. A lady, and they earn like $4 an hour, a lady came and gave me a check for $100. I could have fallen back and just died. It was so sweet to someone who is not wealthy, to be moved by this. So we have to keep that idea of loving everyone very strong. I know it kind of sounds a little bit Pollyanna-ish, but it's a very strong one in our sector. We are all trying to make the world a better place. We deserve to be loved.
Yeah, if you lead with love, then we'll have the ability to connect. I love the idea of a microsite for these sustainers. And one metric I've seen, I think it was last year, online monthly giving, so not overall monthly giving, but online monthly giving grew by 25%, far outstripping overall online giving, and I've got to believe that it's because of our phones, of the friction that is removed from the giving process, and certainly
Absolutely.
that younger people are supporting and giving as well. So it really does feel like sustainer giving has been reborn, from an audience that receives a receipt, breaks out a checkbook and sends in a check once a month, to one that is using Apple Pay, that is substantially younger. And that monthly giving, sustainer giving, is really a great vehicle for program and product design, just like we were talking about earlier. And then that microsite that you shared gives us the ability to completely brand and talk in the voice of that audience, instead of having to appeal to the wider audience, to the traditional audience, or to every supporter like our homepage might.
Yeah. Before I left Food for the Poor, I had this great idea to call Giving Club 7 Saves, $7 a month, to encourage younger people, even high school, because the kids at the cafeteria in a private school spend $11 a day on lunch. It's amazing the amount of money that they actually have. Some have credit cards. And so basically, which parent would object to them giving $7 a month when Frappuccino, whatever, at Starbucks costs $11? So it's a very doable thing. And unfortunately, I wasn't there for the launch, which was recently, and I'd love to see how it worked out. But, I thought, this might be the way to train the young to start giving, giving in a nice, and, of course, being a Christian organization, I always reminded them that St. Paul was the one who actually first spoke about monthly giving.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. That's great. Wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about the role of the website too. I mean, we know it has to be kind of all things to all people. Are there any call outs specifically related to web that you might share?
Well, the fact that it's all geared towards monthly is a good thing. I mean, there are appeals, just like with direct mail, that are not geared to monthly, but the fact that almost everywhere you click, there is a monthly option.
That's amazing. Yes, very cool.
So it's also that we have with the website, there are many things that can work out well in times that are precarious. For example, when COVID was raging, we thought to ourselves, how can we ask our donors to give, to something that is so far away from them when they're dealing with standing in line for toilet paper and being limited to 1 pack of meat when they go to the supermarket. And I know those are not horrible things. So basically what we did was we sent out texts for people. We had text, from our donor base for the web in particular. We sent out 100,000 texts every day offering prayer. We said, now, and I wrote the one for the web that said, now is a time of stress and distress and worry and fretting and this and that and the other. Prayer could be the answer. And then we sent out this in texts, and we had 500 responses the very first day we sent out the texts. After doing this on the web and through texts, we then wrote 5 emails. 2 of them were thank yous, another 3 was asking for money, explaining that where we are standing in line for toilet paper, the people in Haiti do not have a toilet. So that basically ours was more a discomfort, where theirs is actually a real need. Not in that language, of course, in so much softer language. And those 5 emails brought in 40,000 short of $1 million. So if you offer something, and I always ask when I present, what do you offer your donors besides the great feeling of giving? And, a lot of times they don't have anything to tell me. And that we offered them something in prayer, being a Christian organization. And we did a huge investment. Our best investment ever was an internal call center of 71 people on the phones, because these are truly invested in Food for the Poor. So when they call to pray with them, there's, they can ask a question and it can be answered, so that helped a tremendous amount, because with that phone center, we were able to call people to offer prayer or to offer prayer for someone else, who might have died or whatever of COVID. So it really worked out. The web was very instrumental in bringing in money for that. At Christmas time, of course, People don't seem to mind receiving almost one email every day asking for money. And it's amazing what we do at end of year with it.
Yeah, that's incredible. I wanted to wrap with a quote that you have shared with us before. And I love this because I think that it really is the challenge that you've offered to people. It's the question that you just confronted us with as well, saying the donor doesn't give to us because we have needs. They give to us because we meet needs, especially their own. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of how you came about this discussion with Tom and what this means to you.
Well, Tom and I presented together about 50 times. We have in the past, and we are good friends now. And basically, this really encapsulates the whole idea of donor centricity. They don't give us because we have needs, but we meet them. And that's why it's so important to let the donor know what is done with their money, because if we just talk in generalities all the time, then they feel, my gosh, they're not meeting the needs that we want to meet, but especially their own needs of feeling good about themselves, their own needs to fulfill what they feel is their charitable ideal. And that's, it's amazing because when you do that, they give more. The idea of ideal, what is it called? Ideal moral identity. Everyone gets up in the morning thinking, this is who I want to be. And basically, then, by 10 o'clock, we may not have fulfilled that at all. But when we help the donor to fulfill to that moral identity, they become very generous to the organization.
Yeah, so we're a vehicle towards that actualization. I love that. Well, Angel, thank you so much for the discussion today. A lot to think about. I love the way that you've organized this by sharing, so many of your stories. I wanted to close for the audience too with a little bit on how you're working with nonprofit organizations now focused on donor centricity and storytelling, and we're happy to connect folks with Angel who might have additional questions for him as well. But talk to us a little bit about what you're doing as part of your consulting work.
Well, I have always had a heart for smaller charities who can't afford a tremendous amount, to spend otherwise. And while I was at Food for the Poor, I actually went to 4 different charities to give them a day of fundraising. I decided that since I am 72 and I could retire, that I would really just like to work with small charities who can't afford, a team of people or even one person to come to them, and see how I can help them. Basically, whatever they can afford to pay. I don't set an amount. I just tell them whatever you can. And if you can't, I will never turn down a job because of money. So I am trying to help them. Sometimes they're tabula rasa about fundraising. They have no clue whatsoever on how to treat their donor base. Sometimes the donor base is very small, and we have had some success in getting them to give more. I have had moments where they have no idea of what, of using their mission for fundraising. They rather use their organization, and so we have had a few, knocking heads to get them, but it's very rewarding for me because I feel there is still a charitable aspect to the work that I do.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for everything that you do, for sharing your expertise today as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Leah to close us out.
My pleasure, Matthew.
Oh yeah, of course, mine as well.
Thank you so much for joining us, Angel, once again. We do have a survey that we will be launching at the conclusion of this webinar. We would just love if you took a few moments to read through that, answer the questions. I think it says it's a 45-second survey, so it shouldn't take you any time at all. And then I think that's it for today. We will be sending out the slides and the recording within 24 hours. So you can look in your inbox about this time tomorrow, and you should be seeing that. So there was so many great insights. I know I would like to go back and take some extra notes, so I'm sure you'll appreciate that. But with that, I think we can wrap up for the day. Once again, thank you both for the time putting this together for our attendees.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
one.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.